Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts, the place where loyalty never fades, courage wears quiet faces, and the bonds forged between soldiers and their dogs outlast even the hardest storms life can bring. Tonight's story is one of duty, memory, and a promise made on a battlefield that found its way home years later, carried not by words, but by a German shepherd who never forgot. Settle in. This one will stay with you. The rain didn't fall that night so much as it attacked. It came in sheets, heavy and relentless, hammering the roof of Ethan Cole's truck like a drumline with no intention of stopping. The windshield wipers worked frantically, pushing rivers of water aside, only to have more rush in their place. The headlights barely cut through the curtain of storm, casting fractured light across a flooded highway that seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark. Ethan drove the way he did most things, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who has learned to be comfortable in the silence between heartbeats. He was 53 years old, lean and weathered in the way that mountains are weathered, not broken down by time, but shaped by it. His hands rested easy on the wheel. His jaw was set. His eyes tracked everything ahead. Former Navy SEAL, 12 years of service, 4 deployments, a body that carried more scars than stories he was willing to tell. He had been out of the service for nearly 8 years now, and in that time he had built himself a life at the edges of things. A cabin set back from the road, surrounded by old oak trees and silence, so deep you could hear your own thoughts clearly. A modest garden, a small workshop where he carved wood in the evenings, a life stripped down to its essentials, because Ethan had learned the hard way that the fewer complications a man carried, the better he could bear the weight of the ones that remained. But he was never truly alone. In the passenger seat sat Ronan. A German shepherd of extraordinary breeding and training, Ronan held himself with the composed authority of an officer. His black and tan coat was dense and immaculate. His ears, sharp and perfectly erect, moved independently of each other, rotating like satellite dishes tuned to frequencies no human ear could detect. He sat with his forepaws planted squarely on the seat, spine straight, dark eyes scanning the rain-blurred world beyond the glass with an expression that could only be described as professional focus. Ronan had been many things before he became Ethan's partner: explosive detection, threat assessment, tactical support in environments where a single wrong step could cost a life. The military had trained him to be a weapon of extraordinary precision, but it was what lay beneath that training, the deep, unshakable loyalty, the emotional intelligence that no handler's manual had ever fully captured, that made Ronan something more. He and Ethan had been together for 6 years now. They had settled into each other the way two people settle into a long marriage, with an ease that no longer required words, a rhythm that required no explanation. Ethan knew Ronan's signals the way he knew his own breathing, and Ronan, in ways that still sometimes startled Ethan in the quiet of the evening, seemed to know things about Ethan that Ethan hadn't spoken aloud. They were headed home from a hardware store run, nothing urgent, just a quiet Thursday night drive through a town that had largely gone to sleep in the rain. Ethan had the radio turned low, an old country station playing something soft and forgettable. The heater pushed warm air across the cab. Everything was ordinary. Until it wasn't. Ronan stiffened. It happened the way it always did, not dramatically, not with sound, but with a sudden change in the quality of his stillness. One moment he was at rest, the next every muscle in his body had drawn taut. His ears locked forward, rigid and focused, his nostrils flared. A sound rose from somewhere deep in his chest, not a bark, not a whimper, but a low, controlled growl, the kind that held no panic in it, only absolute certainty. He placed one heavy paw against the passenger window, then struck the glass with urgency. Ethan's eyes moved immediately to the right side of the road. SEAL training never truly retires. It sits dormant, patient, waiting for the moment the body needs it again. And in that moment, Ethan's entire nervous system shifted gear, eyes sharpening, breath steadying, every sense leaning forward into the dark. Through the curtain of rain, on the cracked sidewalk of what had once been a respectable neighborhood, a scene was unfolding that made something cold move through Ethan's chest. A young woman stood in the downpour, completely soaked, her arms wrapped around a small boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The boy's face was buried against her side. Her face was turned upward, pale and stricken, as if she were trying to hold herself together through pure will. Around them on the sidewalk, scattered like debris, were boxes, bags, and pieces of furniture, a life thrown carelessly into the rain. Standing before them, utterly unmoved by the storm, was a man in a dark suit. He was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the kind of composed, unhurried bearing that comes from a lifetime of being obeyed. He held a leather folder across his chest like a shield. He was speaking, and though Ethan couldn't hear the words through the glass and the rain, the posture of the woman told him everything he needed to know about what was being said. Victor Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ronan growled again, deeper this time, steadier, not at the chaos of the scene, not at the boxes or the rain or the crying child. His gaze was locked, with the absolute precision of a targeting system, on the man in the suit. Not at the storm, at the man. Ethan had trusted that growl with his life on foreign soil. He pulled the truck to the curb without a second thought. What happened in the next 20 minutes was instinctive, disciplined, and quiet. Ethan didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply stepped out of the truck into the rain, placed himself between the woman and Victor Hale, and spoke in a voice so calm and so certain that it left no room for argument. He told the man that whatever papers he held and whatever rights he believed he had, they could be settled in daylight, in a courthouse, in front of people whose job it was to decide such things. Tonight was over. Victor Hale looked at Ethan the way men like him always looked at complications, with a cold, calculating assessment. Then his eyes moved to Ronan, who had come around the front of the truck and now stood beside Ethan, still, massive, and absolutely focused. Something shifted in Victor's expression. He straightened the folder against his chest, offered a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, and walked back to his car. The taillights disappeared into the rain. Ethan turned to the woman. Her name, she told him through chattering teeth, was Isla Bennett. The boy pressing against her leg was her son, Daniel. He was 6. She hadn't eaten since morning. She had no idea where they were going to sleep tonight. Ethan looked at the soaked little boy, then back at Isla, and made the only decision that made any sense to him. "Come on," he said simply. "Let's get you both dry." His cabin was warm. The wood stove in the corner had been banked before he left, and it took only a few minutes of coaxing to bring it back to a proper fire. Ethan found dry clothes, far too large but warm, for both of them, made soup from what was in the pantry, and moved quietly around his kitchen in the way of a man accustomed to caring for others without making a performance of it.
Isla sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching him with eyes that were still trying to process the evening. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch under two quilts, one small hand tucked beneath his chin, his face, finally, mercifully at peace. Ronan moved through the cabin with the same professional calm he always maintained in unfamiliar situations. He checked the perimeter of the main room. He positioned himself near the door. He watched. And then he crossed the room to Isla. He moved slowly, without urgency, the way he moved when he was being deliberate rather than reactive. He stopped in front of her, lowered his great head, and pressed his chin gently into her open palm. It was a gesture so tender, so specific, that it stopped the breath in Ethan's chest.
He had seen that gesture before. He stood very still at the kitchen counter, a bowl of soup in each hand, and let the memory come forward. A military barracks, evening light slanting through high windows. A younger man, laughing, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a puppy between his knees. The puppy had been gangly then, all years and oversized paws, but even at that age there had been something exceptional in his eyes. "Watch this," the man had said, grinning up at Ethan. "I taught him this myself. Nobody else can get him to do it, just me." He had placed his palm flat in the air. The puppy had leaned forward and pressed his chin gently into it, like a bow, like an acknowledgement. Liam Bennett had laughed like it was the finest thing he'd ever seen. Ethan set the bowls down on the counter very carefully. Liam Bennett, his teammate, his brother in every way that mattered beyond blood, killed in action on a hillside in a country whose name Ethan still couldn't say without something tightening in his throat. Liam, who had been 29 years old and who had talked about his wife and the baby they were expecting with the kind of uncomplicated joy that Ethan had always quietly envied. Ronan, before he had been assigned to Ethan, was first Liam's dog. The puzzle assembled itself in Ethan's mind with the terrible clarity of things that have always been true, waiting only for the right moment to be seen. He looked at Isla, at the way Ronan rested his chin in her palm as though he were returning something precious he had been holding in trust. "If I don't make it back," Liam had said once, late at night, when they were both too tired for pretense, "watch over them for me, will you?" Ethan had said yes, the way soldiers say yes to each other, completely, without negotiation, understanding that the weight of such a promise is not felt until the moment it is needed. He hadn't known until this exact moment that the promise had never been forgotten. Not by him. And not, it seemed, by Ronan. The story that unfolded over the following days was darker than the storm that had started it. Victor Hale was not simply a landlord pursuing a legal eviction. He was a man who had built a quiet, meticulous operation around the vulnerability of people who had no one left to fight for them. Isla had inherited a modest house from Liam, purchased before his last deployment using a portion of his life insurance, the deed held in a trust he had set up to protect his family. After Liam's death, Victor had appeared as a financial advisor, sympathetic and authoritative, offering to help Isla manage the estate paperwork. What he had actually done, Ethan came to understand piece by piece, was a work of calculated fraud. Forged signatures on transfer documents, manipulated digital records, redirected payments. A second life insurance policy, one Liam had taken out specifically for Daniel's future education, quietly redirected into an account with Victor Hale's name buried several transactions deep. It had been done slowly, methodically, over the course of nearly 3 years. By the time Isla realized something was wrong, the documentation trail had been so thoroughly manipulated that her own name appeared on papers she had never signed, authorizing transfers she had never approved. Victor didn't rage when he understood the full scope of it. He went very quiet,
the particular quiet of a man who has moved from emotion into purpose. He contacted a lawyer he trusted. He reached out to two former teammates, one of whom had become an investigator, the other a forensic accountant who specialized in financial crimes. He made calls in the early morning hours from his workshop, speaking in the unhurried, precise way of someone building a structure that would not fall. And through all of it, Ronan was present. In the weeks that Isla and Daniel stayed in the cabin while the legal work took shape, Ronan appointed himself the boy's companion with a gentleness that continually astonished Ethan. He would lie beside Daniel in the evenings while the boy did his homework at the kitchen table, one massive paw resting near the child's foot, close but not intrusive. When Daniel woke from nightmares, and he did several times in those first weeks, Ronan would be there before. Ethan reached the hallway, a warm, steady presence at the bedside that asked for nothing and gave everything. Daniel began to sleep through the night. The documents Victor believed destroyed had not been. Liam, with the careful instincts of a man who understood that some enemies wore suits rather than weapons, had kept a secondary copy of everything that mattered in an old storage trunk locked in his mother's basement, a trunk Ela had been unable to bring herself to open since his death. It was Ronan who found it. They had gone to collect some of Ela's belongings from storage, and Ronan, moving through the space with his nose working in long, deliberate passes, had stopped at an old green trunk pushed against the back wall and sat down in front of it. Not pawed at it, not barked, simply sat with the composed finality of a dog who has completed a task. Inside were the original documents, a sealed envelope in Liam's handwriting addressed to Daniel, a USB drive, and an audio recording transferred to the drive from an old digital recorder of a conversation between Victor Hale and an associate 3 years earlier, in which the entire plan was discussed in specific, damning detail. Liam, it turned out, had suspected Victor long before Ela had. He had simply not had time to act on it. He had instead left everything needed for someone else to finish the mission. The courtroom on the day of the hearing was a serious, quiet room that smelled of old wood and institutional carpet. Victor Hale arrived with 2 attorneys and the composed certainty of a man who believed the outcome was already settled. He straightened his cuffs. He reviewed his notes. He did not look at Ela. He did not look at the man seated beside her, still and watchful, with a German shepherd at his feet. When the audio recording was entered into evidence and the speakers were turned on, the quality of silence in the room changed entirely. Victor's voice, 3 years younger and entirely unguarded, moved through the air of that formal space and made it impossible to look away from the man it belonged to. By the time the recording finished, Victor Hale's attorneys were conferring in urgent whispers. Victor himself had gone very still, the stillness of a man who understands, for the first time, that the ground beneath him has completely given way. Beside Ethan, Ronan sat without moving. His eyes were forward, his breathing was even, mission-focused, exactly as he had been trained to be in the moments that mattered most. The judge's ruling, when it came, was thorough and without mercy. Every fraudulent transfer reversed, the education fund fully restored, the house returned to the trust Liam had created. Victor Hale was remanded pending a formal criminal investigation into financial exploitation of a military widow, charges that carried, as Ethan's lawyer noted quietly, significant weight under federal statutes protecting surviving military families. Isla didn't cry in the courtroom. She had spent enough tears in private. She simply reached down and rested her hand gently on Ronan's broad head, and the great dog leaned into her palm the way he always did, chin down, steady, present. 3 weeks later, on an evening when the weather had turned finally toward something that felt like spring, Ethan sat on the front steps of his cabin while Daniel threw a stick across the yard for Ronan to retrieve. The dog obliged each time with dignified enthusiasm, fetching the stick, returning it, sitting with great patience while the boy wound up for the next throw. Isla sat beside Ethan with a cup of coffee, watching her son laugh for the first time in what felt like years. The sound of it moved through the evening air like something healing. "He told me about you, Liam. He said if anything ever happened, there were people he trusted completely. He never said names, he just said I'd know them by how they showed up." Ethan looked out at the yard, at the boy, at the dog running with deliberate, joyful slowness, fast enough to thrill the child, slow enough to let him feel the magic of the chase. "He was the best of us," Ethan said finally. "Every team has one, the person everyone else is trying to be." Isla nodded. She didn't say anything more, and Ethan didn't either, because some things are honored most by the quiet you keep around them. Daniel let out a shout of triumph as Ronan brought the stick back and sat wagging at his feet. The boy threw his arms around the dog's neck with the completely uninhibited joy that only children possess, and Ronan, this decorated former military working dog who had operated in war zones and walked through smoke and never once showed fear, leaned into the embrace and closed his eyes.
Ethan watched them and felt something settle in his chest. Something that had been restless for years, searching for a shape it couldn't quite find. Liam had asked him to watch over them. He understood now that the request had never been a burden. It had been a gift. Some promises are spoken on battlefields, in the dark, between men who understand that love is simply the word for what they would die to protect. Some of those promises seem to disappear when the man who made them is gone, lost to grief, to time, to the weight of everything that couldn't be said after the loss. But some promises don't disappear. They wait. They travel forward through the years in the hearts of those who carry them, in the memory of a soldier who never stopped keeping his word, in the instincts of a German shepherd who had never forgotten the hand of the man who first loved him, in the quiet faithfulness of people who do the right thing not because someone is watching, but because they were taught by the best that duty is not a burden you put down when it becomes heavy. It is a light you carry all the way home. Justice wasn't delivered that day by anger or by power or by anything loud. It was delivered by loyalty, by memory, by a Navy SEAL who kept his word, and a German shepherd who never forgot where he came from. Thank you for watching Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that loyalty outlasts loss, that promises made in the dark still find their way to the light, then this channel was made for you. Please take a moment right now to subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every story we share honors the quiet courage of veterans, the unbreakable bond between soldiers and their dogs, and the love that refuses to be forgotten. Your subscription keeps these stories alive and helps us reach the hearts that need them most. Hit the bell so you never miss a story. Leave a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you, or share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because some bonds are never broken, some promises are never buried, and some dogs carry the ones we love all the way home. Silent Paws and Brave Hearts, where loyalty never fades.